First, welcome everybody to another episode of, Indiana Adoptee Network's Happy Hour. We meet every Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're glad to have all of you with us tonight. If you would please make sure that you are on mute. We would appreciate that. The way that we roll out our evening, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping items first, and then before we get into the presentation and introduce our spotlight guest tonight. So if you haven't already, please give a shout out in the chat bar, what state or country that you're from, and say hello. For all you first-time Zoomers, this is a little bit about us and who we are and what we do. We have been around for about 4 years, and we're just getting ready to change our name and go national. So we won't be Indiana Adoptee Network much longer. We will be starting our new organization, and you'll hear all about those details later. But these are some of the things that we do here in Indianapolis. We do have people attend our conference from all over the nation, and at last, I think it was 6 countries that we had people come. So it's open to anyone, and we will be hosting our national annual conference in May of 2021. Okay, thank you for that. Whoever wants to do the next slide, we have a little disclaimer that we like to put out as well before we start.
Let me do it, Jen.
Sure.
For participant safety, we will lock your thing on mute and unlock the microphones one at a time. You can raise your virtual hand in the chat. Sorry. This is a public meeting with no guarantee or representation that information or identity shared is confidential. If you are experiencing a serious mental health event, such as suicidal thoughts, please contact a licensed professional or suicide hotline at 1-800-273-8255.
Thanks, Pam. And again, welcome back, everybody. Again, my name is Marcie Keithley. I'm the host for this evening, along with Pam Krosky and Jennifer Paulsing in the Zoom room. We're here with Peter I want to make sure I pronounce your middle name right. Capomolla, is that correct? Moore.
That's correct.
From Australia, and we're really excited to have him with us tonight. Just would like to read just a little bit about him for those of you that don't know Pete. He is a father of 5 and a foster caregiver of many, a grandfather of many, and a keen genealogist of many years. He discovered his adoption in 2017 at the age of 59 via DNA. He's in reunion with both families, maternal and paternal. He also, Peter found Dr. Catherine Lynch at the 5th anniversary of the Apology for Victims of Forced Adoption Luncheon at NSW Parliament House in 2018. And within weeks, Peter found himself recruited by the late William Hammersley-Ellis, who is a discharged adoptee, to join a committee to form Adoptee Rights Australia Inc. Peter's mission is to ensure that no other child shall have to share his experience, the pain of adoption, and identity theft. So welcome, Peter. We're glad to have you on this evening. We're going to hand the floor over to you for about the next 40 to 45 minutes. We ask that all of you hold your questions. You can ask them in the raise your virtual hand and ask a question. And if you would like, this session will be recorded. At the end of Peter's presentation, we will stop the recording so we can open it up to all questions and answers from all of you. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, and yeah, welcome everyone, or in native language, Yama. Yeah, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity for being here, and I'd like to begin where I think if you're interested how I got here. I was brought up in a I guess a loving family, and I wasn't abused or anything. I had a fairly normal childhood, although things disintegrated in later teenhood, and yeah, and probably up until my my 40s, and when I had a change of life, and I discovered genealogy, and I'd been searching my whole life, and my adopted sister, when asked about this, said, all I can say is you're always searching, which is true. And I thought I'd found the answers in genealogy, and I had an session. I created 13,500 people in my family tree. I travelled to family reunions, family tree reunions interstate on both the adopted parents' side. I did not know I was adopted at any of these times, and we travelled to these reunions, and I eventually had a headstone remade for the Irish convict ancestor. And with the aid of some others that I'd found through these reunions, we refurbished the grave and put the headstone on the grave, and we organised a reunion on Australia Day 1988 to celebrate this. And so doing my DNA was just an extension of that. And I had a particular reason for doing this. My oldest grandchildren have olive skin, and not knowing a lot about their father's history, although I know their father well, he doesn't know much about his history. And I was interested to see where that came from. And we got our results in 2016, September 2016. My results, my wife's results, and my oldest granddaughter's results. I knew nothing about DNA, absolutely nothing, didn't understand it. Saw this ethnicity that said Italian. I thought, oh yeah, I read somewhere recently where the Gaelics invaded Rome. It possibly came from there, because above the pie chart it said from thousands of years ago. I took that literally, dismissed it, then looked at my DNA matches. So that's interesting. There's my granddaughter, very close match. There's another very close match. Didn't think too much of it with this woman. She messaged me and said, I grew up in an Italian family. I don't look like my brothers and sisters. Ever since my father's death in 1982, they teased me that I was adopted. She sees our match and says, it was true. I must be adopted. Where am I connected with this guy's family? So being the genealogist I was and the tree builder, I communicated with her about my family, and she told me about hers. And for 6 months, I tried to work out where she fitted in my family. And it became quite evident that I needed to narrow that down. So in December 2016, I gave my adoptive parents DNA kits for Christmas. Not because I had any concerns about them. I just wanted to narrow this down and work out whether this woman was on my paternal side or maternal side. And they didn't flinch, but they didn't do the kits until about February 2017. Early March, knowing the kits take about, the results take about 6 to 8 weeks to come back. Thought I'd look in there anyway, just in case, you never know, they come in early, and was looking through my tree, my DNA results, and it suddenly occurred to me, there's no surnames in my DNA matches that I'm familiar with. Surely somewhere in my 13,500 relatives, someone did their DNA. So the wheels started to turn, and I checked my wife's matches against her surnames. Straight away, I saw surnames in her matches that I was familiar with. The wheels are now turning faster, and I always knew I was born at Salvation Army Bethesda Hospital in Marrickville in Sydney. As it turns out, was my adopted father. And on that point, a number of months before this, with having no thought about this, I asked him, how come I was born there? And he said, oh, we just did what family told us to do. That was the answer. Anyway, I had Googled that hospital before, many years before, and all I got was an image of the old building. I Googled it again in desperation, and all this stuff came about: forced adoption, government apologies. I knew nothing about that, and I was, obviously, I realised it's a smoky gun. I realised then and there that I was adopted. There was too much evidence. I didn't know why I'd never heard about this apology. I was an avid viewer of the media, but this one slipped past me. I knew nothing about it. I went in and my wife was in bed reading. I sat on the end of the bed and said, I'm adopted. She said, get out of here. No, you're not. Well, yeah, I am. Have a look at this. And it's the shock of it all started to sink in. And every morning looking in the mirror, who am I? Yeah, Italian, really? Not Irish. And I realised straight away that this lie had to finish. I saw it as a lie. I had 5 children. I organised a meeting with them and said, this is from left field and you must attend. And if you can't attend, we're going to have to put it off until you can attend, because you're all meant to be here. And that was on Saturday. On the Friday before that, I received the results of my adopted mother. And they had already decided that they were my adopted parents were going to drop in on the Saturday. And the Saturday night, I had arranged this meeting. So we were thinking, when I told her results, I didn't tell them that what I knew. I wanted to see their results. I didn't know at this stage. I was going through my head, how would they not know? I'd read about a thing called rapid adoption, which was when they told the mother that the child had died in birth, and did a rapid adoption to a couple who had had a miscarriage, which fitted my adoptive parents perfectly. I knew that they had a number of miscarriages. So I told my adopted mother, here's your results and this is your ethnicity. And I was waiting for the moment. But there was nothing. And on the Saturday night, when I had the meeting with my children, we were thinking, okay, how do we, I was talking to my wife, how are we going to broach this to them? How are we going to start off? And she said, well, we could tell them I'm pregnant. And I went, well, we could tell them I've come out of the closet. Anyway, we didn't do either of those, but I did decide to ask them what they thought it was. And I can't remember all the answers, but I do remember the youngest daughter, who has always said that she was the favourite because she never got into any trouble. And she said it was because we'd won lotto and we wanted to explain to the others why she was getting a bigger share. And anyway, then I hit them with it. And I actually, the words from a poem that I wrote afterwards were that amidst the laughter, silence fell from the rafter. And that's exactly what happened. And then my youngest daughter burst out laughing and went, your family tree, all that work, all those hours, it's not yours. And so, and that was the beginning of the exposure of the lie. The next thing I did was on the Monday, my adopted father's DNA came in. I thought, okay, I'll go up and see them. And this is another opportunity. Maybe they've had time to think about this. And nothing. Not a pause in the conversation, nothing. It was just poker faced. So that left me with more questions. I had learnt that I was entitled to get the information on my adoption and apply for my adoption certificate, which I did, not knowing whether one existed or not. I was still confused as to how this was all come about. And after a month of waiting, I contacted the organisation I'd gone through, and they said, well, more than contact, I was a bit upset with them because they hadn't contacted me. It wasn't the result I thought I would get. And they told me, oh, it could be 7 or 8 months yet. And I wasn't going to have that. And I went directly to the organisation, the government organisation that has those records. And they gave me a little hint. They said, if you can get a doctor's certificate that confirms that you're having trouble functioning without this knowledge, we might be able to speed it up some. And I did that, and they told me they would send me out some information. 5 days later, a pack of information arrived, and I looked at it in the morning. I went, there's a lot of information there. I haven't got time. I'll look at it at lunchtime at work. Lunchtime came. I had another look and went, geez, there's a lot of information. I'll look at this when I finish. Anyway, I finished work, and I'm in the car park of the premises I was working at the time. And I noticed a plastic sleeve in amongst the paperwork. And I went, what's that? I pulled it out. It was the adoption certificate. I didn't wait 8 months for it. I waited 5 days. In between this wait, I had decided I better learn about DNA. And I split, in my case, I figured it was, I just split the Italian names from the non-Italian names. That's a good start. And I looked at my distant matches, or anyone that had large public trees, and I found a couple of large public trees in about the 6th to 8th cousin mark, quite distant. And I was looking for an ancestral name. And amongst that ancestral, those 2 trees, I found a common ancestor, and I decided it's a good bet. So I copied one of their trees, and I put myself in as that ancestor, and I built it down as an umbrella. And as I did that, I found more and more marriages, which produced more surnames, which confirmed was also in my DNA matches. So I was confident I had the right tree. And if I had found my mother's name, it would be in that tree. Now, whilst this was all happening, I realised that this woman who had contacted me was in fact my sister. And I told her, and she didn't believe it. She thought, oh, my DNA's wrong. I've caused this poor guy to think he's adopted, and it's all my fault. So she went and got another DNA test done, which the results were the same. And eventually she did agree that maybe we shared a father, or we had to have shared a father. But she still thought, well, what, all this stuff in my life, why don't I look like my brother and sister? Is my father really my father? And I promised her that I would find that answer. And that led me on the quest to find my mother. And using the DNA and the ancestral surname, when I got the adoption certificate with her name on it, I just Googled her name and the ancestral name together. And within minutes, that led me to my brother, who had put in a blog on that ancestral surname, and put in a blog and put in his mother's name, his grandmother's name, and his grandfather's name. So I immediately went to the tree that I had developed and looked for the grandfather's name. And not knowing whether I had the right person, I started to add my grandmother's names and my mother's names under his. And of course, in Ancestry, if anyone, those who know Ancestry will know that you get hints of other people who also have those names in their trees. I realised my brother had an Ancestry account, and he'd been active within a couple of days. And he had a tree, And when I went into that tree, I saw that it was him and a brother under a first marriage, a brother and two sisters under a second marriage. And when I looked close, I realised there was a fatherless child in between. So I realised that he knew about me. So I sent him a simple message and just said my name, interested to know more about the fatherless child in your tree, and my phone number. And I think that was at 8:30 or 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. On the Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, I get a phone call from an unknown number. Well, his number, but I didn't know it, and realised it was possibly him. And I answered it, and I just went, I said, Peter Moore. I went, Graham. And I said, you're my mother's, your son, her son. And he went, yes, and so are you. And he told me he had known for exactly 3 weeks, or approximately 3 weeks before. My mother had had a mini stroke before Christmas. This was May of 2017. And she had been worried ever since that she may have a larger stroke and would render her incapable of telling anyone about me or finding me. So she confided in her oldest son and her husband of 55 years that I existed. My brother promised her that he would find me, and she said, well, don't tell your siblings until you do. So I had a conversation with him for an hour and a half, and he gave me my mother's number and told me that she was waiting for the call. She knew that I would call. And he proceeded to ring my siblings and tell them that, hey, we have another sibling. And I spoke to my mother the first time, and her first words, and I don't remember much more of the conversation other than the first words were, I was forced. I didn't want to give you up. And yeah, so we chatted for about an hour, and and over the next 24 hours, I got phone calls from some of my siblings, and one of my sisters told me that when he rang, she wasn't home, and Graham had told her husband that it was important, it was from family, it was left field, and she must ring him that night. So when she's rang him, her husband and son were in the background saying, you got another sibling. And she's saying, shut up, will you? Graham is trying to tell me something, and it's important. And she said, I put the phone down and turned and went, I've got another sibling. So, yeah, it was, yeah, I don't know if it was traumatic or, yeah, quite an experience for them as well. It wasn't just me. And 3 weeks later, they lived interstate in Queensland on the Gold Coast, and most of my siblings live within half an hour of my mother. So 3 weeks later, I flew there with my wife and my oldest daughter and my oldest granddaughter, and we had a reunion. And yeah, and there's I haven't put the picture up. There is a picture of, if those have ever seen some of my media stuff would see that picture of the moment that I'd met my mother. My daughter took the photo, which I'm so pleased that she did. Yeah, had the thought to do that and captured that moment. The Italian side took me a little bit longer. My sister, I guess she suffers adoption trauma for 40 years, even though she's not adopted. I was able to confirm with her that our father was our father. My mother gave me my father's name in the first phone call. And I said, yes, I know quite a bit about him. And I had to inform her that he had deceased. And her words on that were that he was a lovely man. And I've heard numerous relatives of people who knew him have said exactly the same words. So I've learned quite a lot about him. He was highly revered by his family. He came to Australia as a Italian immigrant in 1953. He worked in our nation's capital in Canberra, and he was actually a hairdresser to the to the politicians in Canberra, and the Sir Robert Menzies, who was the Prime Minister at the time, well known. My father was his hairdresser. But if anyone knows Sir Robert Menzies, my father didn't cut his eyebrows. So my father and mother met in Canberra, a long way from my mother's home, and my mother tells me that her father was dying, and her mother was insistent that she come home to help her with her father, and she arrived in outback New South Wales. I mean, really outback New South Wales, and at 8.5 months pregnant, on the doorstep, my grandmother took one look at her and said, "Well, you're not going to show your father," and arranged for her brother to take her to Sydney to get rid of me. On my mother's side, there is Aboriginal heritage as well as Scottish heritage. So we were on the Italian side. I'll go back to the Italian side. My sister, I think, suffering from adoption trauma, although she wasn't adopted, sort of withdrew and said, this is what I'll do. I withdrew into my family unit. She doesn't have a lot to do with my other brother and sister. I basically made her the gatekeeper. I didn't understand, not having grown up in Italian culture, how they would react to me. I wasn't brought up Catholic, don't know much about Catholic faith and how they would react. And that was a concern. So anyway, nothing happened on that front. And I didn't even know my Italian brother and sister. I knew I had another brother and sister. I didn't know their names. And she eventually messaged me and said, "I think you should contact them. You'll have every right. And I'll give you the details." Well, the details never came. So I rang her and left a message, and she rang me back. She said, I'm a bit concerned that I don't want to cause any waves. And I said, well, just give me their names. And which she did. And I found my brother in Melbourne. I found my sister in London. And I decided not to contact them directly at that time, because I thought, and I certainly knew that one of the fears from my sister I was in contact with was what the family how they were going to react. And I thought the only way I'm possibly going to meet these people is if the family accepts me. So I decided to contact some cousins that I found in the phone book in Sydney, and one of the addresses was in a suburb called Bexley. And I decided this day I was going to contact them. I didn't mean to be in Bexley that day, but at that particular time, but I found myself in Bexley. I went, I'm in Bexley. I'll just drive past a house. And I drove past a house, and there was a tradesman's van in the drive, which I knew they were tradesmen. I thought, they're not at work. So I pulled up around the corner and I rang up, and the conversation went like this. "G'day, Tony, how you going, mate?" Which she replied, "I'm going great, mate. How are you?" I said, "I'm a cousin of yours you don't know." He went, "What?" I said, "I'm a cousin of yours you don't know, and I think we should meet." He said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in Bexley." He said, "I'm in Bexley." I went, "Yeah, I know." He says, "Well, how? Why?" I went, "Mate, long story. Do you want to meet at your place or do you want to meet at McDonald's?" And he says, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm around the corner from your place. I'm 2 minutes from McDonald's." He said, "I'll meet you at McDonald's in 5. So he met, I told him, he went, wow, I think we better sit down. Told him the story. He said, your father and my father were very close. He said, your father brought my father out from Italy when he was 16 and gave him a start. What I didn't know was the house wasn't Tony's house, it was his parents' house. And he said, do you want to come round home and meet mum and dad? And I went, they might, I said, it might be a bit of a shock for them. And he went, well, yeah, but they'll get over it. So I'm in a van as well, tradesman's van. I followed his tradesman's van round. He drove up the driveway. I followed him up the driveway. We got out, walked into the courtyard. As I walked in the courtyard, his father walked in the courtyard from the garage. His mother walked in the courtyard from the house. I shook his father's hand and went, buongiorno. I shook his mother's hand. I went, buongiorno. And they started to talk to me in Italian. And Tony jumped in and went, no, he doesn't speak. And so he started to explain to them in Italian who I was. And I'm nodding my head going, yes, it's true. And his father, who is my first cousin, has dementia. And he said to me, when you're walking in the drive, he said, I know this man. Who is he? I know him. And I'm thinking, you're looking in the mirror. And anyway, that was the start. And there was some rejection. I have an auntie, my father's sister lives in Bexley as well. And they said, you have an auntie that lives there. And I also knew I had another auntie in Italy. And my sister had contacted her when she was on holiday there, and she tried to speak about me and she didn't want to know. So I figured that the sister in Sydney would be the same. They would have talked. Anyway, my Joe's wife decided she decided she wanted to call her, and I went, well, I'll leave it to you. But then the conversation started out, laughing and joking in Italian, and then silence, and I realised that she didn't want us to come round. And Joe's wife was upset, and I said, no, it's okay, it's be all right. And Tony's saying, oh, she'll come round, and Joe's going, well, let's just go round there. What's she going to do, kick us out? They go, no, Dad, it's all right. And anyway, I said, look, now it's been a good day, and anyway, the following week, I was overseas on business, and I came back and I rang Tony and I said, I just want to see how the dust settles. And he said, has Fabio rang you? I went, who's Fabio? He said, that's your auntie's son. He's all excited. He wants to go out for dinner. I'm surprised he hasn't rang you. He said, I'll give you his number. You ring him. So I rang Fabio, and we got on like a house on fire. And anyway, eventually he arranged a luncheon at his place. And then he said to me, you're in contact with your sister? I went, yes. He said, we haven't seen her for decades. I'd like to invite her. Can you invite her for me? I went, yes. So I rang her up and told her, and she made all these excuses why she couldn't be there. And about 3 days before, this was Easter Monday, 2018, and about 3 days before, she messaged me, is it still on? I went, yes. Are you sure it's all right if I go? I went, yes, Fabio's asked you. This is her family, this is my new family, and she said, should I take my husband? I went, yes. Anyway, didn't hear from her. I arrived at Fabio's place, and my sister was there, and my auntie was there. And I asked Fabio a few weeks later, I said, how did you get your mum there? He said, I didn't. She kept asking me, had I met you yet? He said, I kept saying, I'm arranging something. Eventually he said, oh, we have this luncheon on Easter Monday. And he said, I didn't say any more. He said, my wife stepped in and said, why do you want to come? And she said, well, who's going to pick me up? Curiosity got to her, I guess. And we get on really well now. I ring her quite often. I got a phone call the following day from another cousin. A woman rang me up and she says, I'm going to shock you. And I went, you're not going to shock me. And she said, I was your father's apprentice. I owe everything I have in life to your father. And she said, I didn't know about the luncheon. And what I didn't know is there'd been a little rift in the family for many years, and one side hadn't taught the other. And she was telling me the phones are going hot. Cousins haven't talked to each other for a decade or more, are all talking. And she arranged another luncheon the following weekend with another group of cousins. And these luncheons both went for 7.5 hours. And I went back to Italy. My father's buried in Italy. He went back to Italy to die. And I went to a trip into Italy in 2018 and got a wonderful reception there. I did say to one of my cousins, this cousin who arranged the second luncheon, I said, I'm a little bit concerned. It's in southern Italy. I know as you go further south, they speak less English, and I'm worried going into this little village, and I don't know anyone. And she said, oh, it's okay, it'll be okay. Just knock on the first door you come to. They'll know who you are. And I'm still skeptical. And she said, no, if you see some kids in the street playing, just go and see the kids. They'll know who you are. And anyway, I did get a call before I went from the wife of my auntie in Italy's son, her daughter-in-law. And I told her, and she arranged for another cousin's husband to pick us up from the bed and breakfast that we were staying at 10 k's away, who also happened to be run by a distant cousin. And it was true. When we were in the village, people were coming out the doors and go, do you know so-and-so? Yes, I'm a sister, that's my cousin. Everyone's related in that little village. And so, yeah, I had a wonderful experience there. I visited my father's grave a number of times by myself, and sat down and recited my poem to him. It's just something I had to do. And a couple of Italian ladies come up to me, obviously heard me, and I indicated, that mio padre, my father, and they looked and they went, oh, they told me what village he came from. So, but I know all that got back to my family because it got back to me in Sydney. So yeah, that's basically the story as far as how I found out. As the introduction that Marcie gave, I had a chance meeting with Dr Catherine Lynch, who was speaking at that luncheon in New South Wales Parliament House, and she invited me to join a Facebook group, which I did, and then my dear friend William messaged me and said, I want you to join this other one. And unbeknownst to me, there had been this committee forming, which had gone back a number of years. Basically, it first talked about it straight after the apology in 2013, and it had a couple of false starts, and they were trying again. And William brought me in, and it became incorporated in my name because I was in New South Wales, and so I was a public officer for the first year, and then earlier this year I was voted in as president, which is, it's a humbling role on my part. It's not something I strive for, but it looks like I'm the one. I've been fortunate to be able to use my story to promote adoptee rights, and that's ongoing. We seem to be getting traction. We do a lot of submissions to different state governments. When they bring up a bill that we don't agree with, we put in submissions. We did one in Queensland recently. We actually did two in Queensland at the same time. but one of them had something like 34 submissions, 31 were against the bill. We know this is often a process they just go through to say they've ticked the box, and then they go and decide and recommend the opposite anyway, which happened in that case. But that bill didn't go through. It's been withheld now or put over, and there's an election happening in Queensland, so it won't be heard again until after the election. So yeah, we don't know where that is at the moment, but it hasn't been passed. So we do that in every state. We represent the whole of Australia. So yeah, there's lots of work going on in the background. Every time something comes up, there's lots of commissions of inquiry. There's a commission of inquiry in Victoria into what's happened since the apology, which I don't know how that came about, but it was there. So we've made submissions. That's been put off by COVID. They've asked us to speak directly to the commission. There's another commission at the moment which I am investigating. A couple of our members have been they put submissions into it. It's on disability and discrimination and disability, and although it seems like it's a strange one, some of the criteria is not only abuse, but also, I'm trying to think what the word is. I've got it written down somewhere. It's being used effectively, for want of a better word, and I think that comes into adoption, that we were used for someone else's purposes. So we're looking at that might be a little bit of an thing. It's like a shink in the arm, somewhere to get into this. It's very hard to get a Royal Commission going on your own, but when you've got one going and you can use it and maybe widen the terms of reference, so we try at all different angles, and there's other groups within Australia that we align with, and I think the more arrows firing, one of them will get through, or the sheer massive amount realise that, well, this is not going away. We can't shut them up, which is, I think, when you go back to the origins of the forced adoption, was a small band of mothers of loss who pursued that relentlessly. They went to court, they protested outside the members of Parliament's offices. They just wouldn't give up. And eventually the members of Parliament said they wanted to put them in the stolen generation. And for those who don't know, the stolen generation was when they took Aboriginal children, Indigenous children from their families because they were Indigenous, and they wanted to lump them in with stolen generation, and they refused to do that at the time. And they said, well, what can we do to shut you up, basically? And they said, we want an inquiry. And the inquiry revealed that of all these practices under forced adoption that were illegal and were documented. And so that's how the apology came about. I wasn't there, so I can't speak directly about it all, but that's basically how it came about. So, and that encourages myself and I'm sure others that persistence pays, even when you're hitting roadblocks and you don't think you're getting anywhere. You just keep going, and you'll get knockbacks, and you'll think, yeah, what am I doing this for? But and then you look back and you say, well, actually, we've made some progress here, and a recent one about integrated birth certificates came up in New South Wales. Now, a lot of adoptees see an integrated birth certificate as an answer for them, and it ties up both families. And by an integrated birth certificate, I mean a birth certificate that has both the biological parents and the adoptive parents on the same certificate, and it's a legal document. And we said, okay, we accept that that's a choice that some adoptees should have, We don't accept that it should be used ongoing for new adoptees, because we think that they should be using the original birth certificate and not changing the name. And it doesn't help those who do no longer want to be adopted or do not want the adoptive parents' names on their birth certificates. Which brings us to discharge. Under Australian law in most states, there is an avenue to discharge the adoption. We believe that was put in as a get out of jail card for adopters, that if things didn't work out, they could send the child back and discharge the adoption. Now, of course, that avenue has been used by adoptees to discharge their adoption and revert back to their original birth certificate. Whilst we understand that's not what everyone wants, we believe it should be an option for those who want it, that adoptees should have options that suit adoptees, by adoptees for adoptees, rather than being told by governments and bureaucrats what is good for them. And we believe adoptees are the ones who know what's good for them and what will suit them. So that's our next front, as we're fighting that one. It brings us back to the integrated birth certificate in Parliament. My thoughts were presented by my local member, but I was quite encouraged that quite a number of other members of Parliament spoke about similar issues, and in one case, someone spoke about a no-fee discharge for Indigenous adoptees who wished it. I see that as a step. We can use that to leverage if that was the case. Which, if you give it to Indigenous, then rightly it should belong to everyone. So that was heartening that was mentioned in Parliament, and it was the Speaker was the Secretary to the Attorney General, and my Member of Parliament's talks with the Attorney General has indicated he is open to hear our voice. So that's an ongoing one that we're following up. So yeah, so we're getting traction. We get they know we're not going away. So I think that's the main thing. How are we going for time? We've nearly half an hour. A little bit more about discharge. William had a discharge in last year. Last year. I think it was August. I've got a feeling it might have been the 1st of August. I can't remember. But he got a complete discharge in the Victorian court. And in his case, his mother's name on his birth certificate had been altered to her married name, and his stepfather's name had been put in as his father. And the court ordered that his mother's name be reverted to her maiden name, and his stepfather be replaced by his biological father, who he had only discovered by DNA 2 months before and discovered he was deceased. So what the court accepted was that ancestry DNA and the methodology to determine who his father was, they accepted that as evidence, which is the first I know of anywhere. Anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never heard of that being accepted in court before, because normally it is they need a paper trail to prove that you were the one who gave the DNA. But in this case, the court accepted it and accepted that was his father, and look, if you'll see the photos of his father and himself, there is no doubt. But yeah, so that was a landmark decision, and the court had arranged a certificate to be made up to present to him with a discharge, and he became the person he identified with before his death, and he died just after a month after he received that discharge. And William had in a national newspaper, or actually Sydney Morning Herald, an article where he said, man's dying wish, to die as a person he identified with. So yeah, there was a lot of celebration, but also the realisation that William wouldn't enjoy that for very long. That I actually travelled to Melbourne the day that decision came down, and spent time with a number of Adoptee Rights members at William's house, and celebrated with him. So he's not the only one. We have other members who have had discharge. Sharon from South Australia, she fought it herself because the barristers told her you won't win, and so she I don't think of the word. She presented the argument herself, and she won. And I can't speak too much about that because she had to go to the Children's Court in South Australia. In New South Wales, we have to go to the Supreme Court. In Victoria, you have to go to the County Court. But in Sharon's case, when she arrived at the court, they said, what child's case are you here for? Which she responded, I am the child. Which is bizarre when you think about it. And that brings us to, in a lot of the legislation because same as the states in the US, the states are responsible for their legislation, and a lot of the legislation defines a child as anyone under 18 or anyone over 18 who is to be adopted or is adopted. So enshrined in the legislation, adoptees in Australia are forever children. And a 62-year-old, I am a child under that legislation and controlled by that legislation as a child. And I think everyone accepts that's a bizarre notion. But it's another avenue of a lever that we can use in our argument. Yeah, how are we going for time? I usually talk longer than this, but
Yeah, it is 8 o'clock, and what we'd like to do, if that's all right with you, is to go ahead and close the recorded portion of this evening's presentation and open it up to questions and answers, because I know that we have a tendency to get a lot of those and then we run over. So we want to make sure we get all the questions answered. But before we begin, really quick, I just want to thank you again for sharing your story. Peter, it was amazing. It's always amazing to hear the journey to find out who you are. And I know we've got some people here that are just would like to drill down a little bit more on that. And congratulations to your continued work for adoptee rights and anything we can do, because we know here in Indiana, our 9-year struggle, what we went through. So in our home state, so we can definitely appreciate the work that you're doing there, and anything that we can do to assist, we'd like to be available to you. So I know Mary was the first one that made a comment,